Hello, I'm Bob the Booker and welcome to my channel. Today I am joined by Justin David and we'll kind of go on to talking a little bit about his press and about some of his books in just a moment. But Justin and I essentially met through a book, particularly the book Address Book by Neil Bartlett, which was one of my absolute favorite books of last year. A beautiful set of kind of queer stories all sort of meshed together in this beautiful thing. I'll link you separately to the video, but through that I met Justin, who is one of a team who has published that book, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a sec. But Justin, do you want to say a quick hi, who
hi,
you are?
Everyone. And really lovely to be here with you, Bob. Thanks very much for having me along.
My pleasure, thank you. And yeah, do you want to say a little bit just to kick us off just about Inkandescent, just sort of who you are and what that all has looked like?
Yes. How do I say it all in one mouthful? We started in 2016. We were, when I say we, I mean Nathan and I, Nathan Evans. His role is the editor and I am the publisher. And we were just a little bit fed up with being rejected. We'd been submitting our own work and trying to get projects off the ground. Nathan's a filmmaker and I'm a novelist. And it was just extremely difficult to get publishing contracts. So I decided, if you can't beat them, join them. And we got a small Arts Council grant together and we made our first book. So Threads was our first book. It was a collaboration between Nathan and myself, his poetry and my photography. So it was a kind of illustrated art book. And that was enormous fun to do. It was like being back at art school. And in doing that, we just learned so much. It was a very steep learning curve. And after that, we wanted to do more books. And we decided that we could help other people who were in our predicament, who were writers who come from, underrepresented places and groups. So we decided to help other writers who were underrepresented, who were kind of feeling the same predicament, and help them to get published too. And we started to build a platform for them. And our first book, that wasn't our book, it was Autofellatio by James Maker. It was a memoir and he was a musician. And that won the Polari First Book Prize. And then just weeks ago, we got into it was announced today, actually. We didn't win an IBBY, but we were in the London finalists for the best small press the year. So we've come from, the kind of being a small art school project to, now I feel like I'm a real publisher.
Yeah, and that's no small feat, particularly given how much of it kind of contended with lockdown as well. So yeah, and obviously Neil Bartlett's book being one of them that was sort of published as well, which was just such an absolute delight. And it's so great to see a book like that getting out into the world. There we go. Yeah. And I just think, I know I've gone on about this book quite a lot over the last few months, but it's so brilliant to have sort of queer voices and queer stories like that told and sort of out in the world. And I think, it's as much as obviously we're seeing a lot of kind of queer books being published a lot more than perhaps in the past, still there's a need for so many of those voices.
Absolutely.
And obviously your own book is one of those. Nice little transition there, Bob. So let's talk a little bit about it. So I've got it just here. So we've got there we go. I've still got the bit of paper in with the little note you sent as well. So but Kissing the Lizard by Justin David. Do you want to maybe give a little bit of an introduction to the book, sort of what is the story of it, and tell me a little bit about your thoughts on it?
So this is Kissing the Lizard, and I had immense joy writing it. It was lots of fun. It's about a young artist who has moved to London from the West Midlands and is kind of he's a fledgling queer. He's just kind of beginning to explore that world and start to find out about who he really is, and kind of find his place in the world. And he gets lured away to the States by a friend, well, somebody he thinks is a friend who actually is has a different agenda. And Jamie, the main character, the artist, he finds himself in New Mexico in the desert just outside Taos, where hardly any people live, but the people that are there living kind of geodesic domes and earth ships, and there are a few caravans dotted about. And yes, he finds out that his so-called friend is part of a very strange cult, and the rest of the story is about how Jamie navigates his way out of this kind of entrapment, and extricates himself away from these awful people and back home to his family. And yes, the other part of the story that, you know, it's kind of parts of it are, there's a lot of black humor in it, so and that comes out a lot with the scenes with his mum and dad, who are essentially versions of my mum and dad. And you know, it is a kind of fantasy, it's fiction, but I guess you know, there's a lot of it that's kind of life writing, and the trendy term for that now is autofiction, isn't it? So it's fiction, but it's kind of parts of my life that I've mythologized, if you like, and kind of turned up the color on certain areas. So quite a lot of what happened in Kissing the Lizard actually happened to me. So, you know, that's where it came from, is partially my own experience.
Because I was sort of curious on that, because it felt so real and lived that I wanted, particularly the dialogue, I know sort of felt so real that I was like, I think Justin knows these people, but I'm kind of
terribly nosy, and I love watching people. I'm a real, I sit and observe people all the time.
Yeah.
And part of my route into the fiction is often hearing people's voices. So I listen. I've got snippets of conversations in there, and you know, there's all sorts of bits and pieces that find their way into my story. My mother always says, "Be careful what you say around him, because it'll be in a book one day."
The sort of classic thing about being sort of friends or sort of family with the writer.
Don't be friends with a writer; they'll just steal you and put you in a book.
And on that note, sort of what led you to kind of to write it? What was the sort of reason why you sort of thought, yes, this is the story I need to tell?
Well, I guess the answer to that is very similar to the answer of why do I write any of my books. I think they are. Well, they have been, up to a point, all about me getting to know myself and finding my place in the world, as Jamie was doing. And you know, when you're writing, you can, it's like picking an object up and then looking at it from every angle and then saying, right, I know what you are now, I can put you down. And sometimes that's cathartic. Sometimes there's, you know, a feeling of having understood oneself. And as I said, sometimes it's kind of creating a mythology. I've rewritten things the way I would have liked them to have gone, or, you know, certainly, you know, my mother's not really like that. She's far less camp in real life, and you know, she's quite ordinary. But they are, characters with the volume turned right up.
Right. And sort of linked to that, I mean, because I was really curious about that, because I sort of thought, you know, you mentioned about finding yourself, and that comes across really strongly in the book, and sort of, you know, that's obviously a very queer experience. You know, that's sort of, it's obviously not unique to queer people, but something that queer people have a sort of direct relationship to. I was sort of curious about, you know, you putting that into the book. So why was that the sort of central sort of story that you wanted to tell as part of that?
You mean the experience of going to?
Oh, sorry, yeah, the experience of sort of working out who you are and sort of finding community.
Well, it's just it was something that was burning inside me, really, and I guess most queer writers have to write that book, you know, that queer book. I don't know why. I don't. I guess there are just, you know, so many experiences that I've had in my life, and some of them are quite formative. Some of them are, though, you know, the ones that scar you and stay with you, you know, and you maybe just to get them, you know, as a form of therapy. It was such a dramatic thing to happen to me, you know, to find myself on the other side of the world, far, far away from my friends, my parents, and anyone who really, you know, it was like while I was there, I even just missed EastEnders. It was just such a weird experience to be around people that weren't very friendly and didn't have my best interests at heart. And the feeling of maybe not getting home, and just being so isolated. I mean, while I was there, it went from kind of summer weather to snow.
Right.
And I'd taken all the wrong clothes. Can I remind everybody that I was about 20 when this happened? So I was, it was really naive, and it had a big impression on me, this experience. So yeah, it's one of those formative experiences. It has affected the way it changed me, and it made me who I am, really. It's one of those formative experiences of being kind of trapped and isolated. And I have to say, I haven't been on many long haul journeys since. I have since been back to the States quite a few times, but never to the desert.
Right. Which, if you read the book, you'll maybe see why. And this book itself is linked to a sort of, to another, to The Pharmacist, another one of yours. And so I'm sort of intrigued, because so The Pharmacist came out first, right? And then sort of...
It did. I'm writing them all in the wrong order, but, you know... It didn't stop George Lucas, did it? You know, Star Wars came out in the wrong order, so I think I'm up with the best. In Kissing the Lizard, there are two guys, Jamie and Billy, who are in a relationship. And so Kissing the Lizard is about Jamie. And the next book, The Pharmacist, it focuses more on Billy. And he's also an artist, and it's when he lives around... in the East End of London, in Shoreditch, and he's an artist in Shoreditch. It's kind of pre-gentrification, so Shoreditch at that time was kind of teeming with artists, and people had little galleries, and there were bars, and it was, you know, everybody was there. It was so exciting, and it's set around Columbia Road, where there was a very famous flower market. And I remember that time just being visually stunning. And, you know, for me, I've got really, really happy memories of that time. I think it was the last time in London when you could actually kind of be an artist and still make a living without having to have a second job, as everyone seems to have to do now. If you're a writer or an artist, or, you know, doing any creative pursuits, everybody is actually making money in a different way. But it just seemed to have its heyday. East London was a hive of activity. I'm not really telling you about the book, am I? So Billy lives in that area, and he comes across a very eccentric old man who he enjoys taking photographs of. And he spots him one day in the market, and sees him doing what he seems to be a drug deal, and it turns out that Albert, the old man, is the pharmacist. He's a drug dealer, a very unlikely one, and gets away with all sorts of things because of who he is and how he looks, and a very queer, elegant, effeminate old man, who's actually quite dashing and charismatic and attractive to Billy. And what follows is a sexual relationship. And I don't know how much more I can tell you without spoiling it.
You'll have to read it.
Yes.
But
only very short, so, you know, you can read it in... How long did it take you, Bob?
So I had quite a lot of commutes that week, so I read it quite quickly. I think it was just sort of a couple of hours. But I think as I emailed you, I was reading quite a graphic sex scene whilst on a packed train and was very aware.
Always the best.
Which is, yeah, exactly. But it was very, I mean, I like to think it improved the commuting experience for several Londoners that day. Apologies if that was you.
Why apologise?
No, true. Yeah, no need to apologise. It's a great scene.
Yeah, I mean, the title's okay. You know.
Yeah.
I've just got this behind me. This one's not so great on the tube.
Yeah. I can't remember the name of it. I was reading an Irvine Welsh book on a packed train once, and it's one that's got like a rubber doll for certain purposes on the front cover.
Porno.
Yes, I think that is the one. Yeah, and
blow up doll on the front
yes.
cover.
And I'd forgotten about it halfway through the journey, and then sort of suddenly, like, someone was sat in front of me, and I put the book down. I was like, "Oh, this is not what it looks like." I mean, it kind of is, but also not.
I think you could get away with that though, because Irvine Welsh is so well known
that true.
Everybody would know. Oh, that's Irvine Welsh, and it's excusable. But you know, I'm not so famous yet.
Not yet, but one day. But it's sort of in terms of revisiting that story, because obviously writing Pharmacist and then coming back for sort of Kissing the Lizard and sort of reconnecting with those characters, what was it sort of about that? What sort of felt unfinished almost, that you sort of felt that you wanted to return to the world of those characters, or was there sort of a sort of specific reason you wanted to stay in that world?
Bob, there's actually more.
Right.
There are more of these books that haven't been published yet, and they're all going backwards. Yeah, I've revisited these characters many times. So there are stories that come before Kissing the Lizard, and
right.
I've got a book called Tales of the Suburbs, which is coming later on this year.
Oh, lovely.
I think maybe early next year, but I think it's late this year if I look at my publishing schedule. And so I you know, they're kind of my family, you know. These characters I've got to know, and they're just around, and I think I'm going to keep writing about them until I'm done, you know. I've got more to say about them.
Nice.
And also I guess they're kind of, the chronology sort of matches my own life. Kissing the Lizard was very much the 90s, the early 90s, and you know, being a student, or just you know, having graduated from being a student, and then the Pharmacist was, you know, a few years on from that, and yeah, well, that was around the time of the millennium. So you get to see different times in London. Yeah. And then there will be a book that comes after the Pharmacist, which I haven't decided on the title yet, but okay. that again, that tells the same characters, but moving on in time.
Lovely. And I think that's something that I found really interesting about the two of them sort of side by side, is it does feel like sort of queer time capsules almost, of sort of, you know, with sort of Kissing the Lizard, there's a very specific 90s feel, and particularly what that looked like for queer people and in London. And I think it's sort of so fascinating to kind of capture some of those times. I think, you know, it's something I think we often don't necessarily think about too much. You know, the shadows of Section 28 still loom quite large over quite a lot of our lives. I know that when I was at school, Section 28 was still in effect. And in fact, I'm reading Paul Baker's book about Section 28 at the moment, which is really interesting. But what I sort of think was really interesting about that is I think we do tend to sort of see certain periods of time as sort of being very much a certain way for sort of queer lives. And actually, I think what's really great about your books is sort of unpicking that actually on the surface, yes, this sort of piece of legislation has changed, but actually this is what it looks like for people on the ground. What were sort of your thoughts around kind of capturing that time, and how did you sort of make sure that you captured sort of what that time felt like as you were writing them?
Well, I mean, I don't want to talk too much about another book that hasn't been published yet, but Tales of the Suburbs is much more about Jamie as a young boy, and who is literally experiencing the effects of Section 28, you know, firsthand as it was happening at school. And so there's all the kind of unspoken moments in his family, you know, people just didn't talk about it in those days. We didn't have the words for it. I was bullied at school, and I couldn't tell my teachers why I was being bullied, because there was the fear of being shamed and it not being accepted, and possibly making things worse for myself. So I was very passionate about writing about those things. And you know, of course, that came out in Tales of the Suburbs, but then you see the effects of that, you know, in Jamie as he grows up. And possibly, you know, that's a contributing factor to why he might have found himself so far away from home in the middle of the desert with strange people. You know, because he allowed himself to become bullied once more, you know, in one way or another.
Yeah, and I think, you know, thank you for sort of sharing that and for putting that into the books. And I think what I found particularly really touching, and you've mentioned sort of your parents as well, but in Kissing the Lizard, we sort of start and end the book with the parents and sort of and the sort of discussion around how they feel about it, and it's so beautiful to watch, again, without spoiling anything, to sort of watch how that changes. I'm kind of curious to sort of, you know, obviously share as much or as little as you want, but sort of why was that important for you to sort of show in the book?
Well, I really get off on the humour. You know, I guess my parents, there's a certain kind of gallows humour with my family, and it might be a class thing. It might be the fact that I come from the West Midlands. I'm not sure, but we deal with a lot of things through humour and through poking fun at each other. And I'm feeling my way through this question, but yes, as a youngster, I think I misinterpreted that kind of teasing for you know, what was going on at school and what was going on at home were very, very different things, but they in my head they became very similar. So you know, I wasn't sure whether I was being picked on at home. You know, I had this uncle who used to tease me, and they called me Nancy Boy, my own family, and you know, but it was a kind of term of endearment. And they didn't know that it was having such an effect on me. And I guess, you know, those sorts of experiences are what I wanted to write about, and the humour and Gloria, who is a kind of version of my own mother, the way she comes to terms with, you know, she's hysterical, isn't she? She's yeah, everything's high drama, and yeah, the way she deals with everything is kind of, you know, really high octane. And I wanted to kind of show how, you know, how she came to terms with it, and not just coming to terms with Jamie's sexuality, but she comes to terms with herself, really. She learns a lot about herself, and about her own marriage and her place in the world. I guess that, you know, the similarity between these two books are that, you know, they're both novellas, and I'm starting to love the novella, and I've read quite a lot of novellas, and I don't think I'm a writer of long books.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Because I sort of used to sort of like a good old chunky book, and I think maybe it's because I'm a little bit more time poor than I was before, but I think there is something really quite glorious about when a book can do what it's meant to do, in like what it's intending to do within 150, 200 pages. And some of my absolute favorite books of all time are that length.
Absolutely.
So, you know, it can be it depends on the kind of story, right? Something like a dress book by Neil Bartlett, I think needed that length to kind of tell various different characters and sort of weave them together. So I think it has to sort of form and function, have to sort of fit here a bit, right? But I think
even that, each story is in its own sort of capsule.
Exactly.
It's an overarching plot, and it does. To me, it feels like a novel of sorts.
Yes,
we call it a mosaic novel.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, Neil would have written each of those pieces, in stages. So.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I think it is, honestly, not just saying this because you're here, but like, honestly, is impressive how much you managed to pack into what collectively is about 250 pages between the two books. And these are sort of full worlds. So yeah, I do kind of commend you in sort of in managing to sort of get that in. And I think especially, I think it's really beautiful to just sort of read that kind of queer representation of just this sort of very like fun, smart dialogue between queer characters, because that's how like that this felt very much like kind of conversations I have with friends, maybe not the desert stuff, but like the like sort of generally, like these are conversations that feel very real to me. I don't know if you've read Detransition Baby by Torrey Peters at all. Yes, because for me, one of the things I loved most about that book, and I saw a review. I kind of trot out this line, I think, every time I talk about Detransition Baby, but I saw a review of it where somebody said it was something like not sort of without without the cis or whatever, as in basically the conversations that trans people have amongst themselves when cis people aren't around. And I am always really, really drawn to that kind of thing in books where you are like, actually, that's how people speak. And I think you've managed to pull that off here in these two books of sort of queer characters talking to each other, and it not feeling like, hello, other queer person, I am queer, listen to my, because I've read some books that have really rankled with me because of that, because it's felt like I'm like, no, I've never met anybody who's spoken like this. So yeah, that felt very, very real in terms of your dialogue. No, my pleasure. So on that note, what are some of the books that you've been enjoying? Are there any books that you would like to sort of recommend and talk about as well?
Bob, it's almost as if you'd sent me the questions beforehand. It's funny you should say that I have some of the books here.
How curious. Yeah.
One of my favorite writers is Garth Greenwell, and I don't know whether you've managed to delve in yet, but
I've read that one. Yes, I've not read Cleanness. Cleanness? Yeah, I've not read that one yet. I've read What Belongs to You.
What Belongs to You is just beautiful, beautiful writing. It's so poetic, and yet somehow he manages to kind of blend literature with pornography. I mean, some of it is very graphic, and unapologetically so. And I mean, I listened to the audiobook with Garth actually reading it, and I'm one of those really boring people. I have to have the digital version, the audio version, and the paperback or the hardback in this case, because I love having the books on my bookshelf. And I go back to sentences. How did you do that? How did you structure that sentence without any commas? I mean, there aren't any paragraphs. Have you noticed?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. It's been a couple of years since I read it.
So there are paragraphs, but there are very few, and very, very long sentences. But somehow you can sustain the sentence without noticing. It's just beautiful and poetic. And then Cleanness, similarly, has some of the same characters. Main character is the same, and it's set in Sofia, Bulgaria.
Oh yeah.
And so it's a return to the same territory. Nice. It's a very different sort of book. I just loved it. I don't know what else to. It's very difficult to talk about these two books without spoiling them. I mean, yeah,
definitely
graphic, sexually graphic, very erotic. And I felt, after I read this book, I felt changed. I mean, I know that sounds like such a dramatic thing.
No, not at all.
I really did feel like, oh my God, like I'm not going to be the same person after that.
Yeah. There's something so beautiful within the tragedy of it, right? There's sort of, I think the way he captures shame for characters is so, like, I have very rarely read it being done that well. That kind of queer shame thing in books. It's so brilliantly done in What Belongs to You, I thought.
Yeah. And well, yeah, I mean, that comes across in Cleanness as well. And you must read it, Bob, because
yes, I'm sure I'll love it. That's the thing.
You know, one of the as well as the shame and the similarities between his own life back in America and the students in Bulgaria. You know, so he examines that, but there's also his acknowledgement of his own privilege that actually he can leave Bulgaria after his placement as an English teacher. He can go back to America, and you know, everything will be fine. But life in Bulgaria is still pretty horrendous if you're queer and you know, you don't have any money. So those boys can't escape their own existence. And those two kind of dynamics coming together were really powerful, and I found it very, very moving. And again, you know, Garth did spend time in Bulgaria, so you know, in terms of it mirroring my own work, you know, autofiction and kind of the blend between fiction and memoir, I really enjoyed that, and I'm really drawn to that sort of writing.
Definitely.
You want more, don't you?
Yes. If you have any others any other books you love.
I'm going to mention this is again. I noticed this. Yeah, I want to be a publisher of diversity, but I'm drawn to, you know, male queer writers. So here's another one. This guy's not alive anymore, so they're not contemporary. You know, not current. But Patrick White is someone that I just keep going back to again and again and again and again for the same reasons. The Vivisector, beautifully poetic. Actually, this is like a doorstop. You know, it's
I've read the Vivisector. I think I struggled with bits of it, but I could never deny that it was beautifully written. Like, it's just such a his use of language is just ridiculous.
I mean, I always think that it should be a film, but it would be impossible to make.
Right.
It would be a challenge for somebody to turn this into a movie because it's so vast. Yeah. And you know, it kind of goes from birth to his very, very old death. Yeah. Oh gosh, terrible spoiler. Guess what? He dies in the end.
I don't think that's a spoiler. I think quite early on we're meant to sort of see that it's his full life. And I think it's quite incredible when authors can pull it off, because I've definitely read some books where I'm like, I don't really care about this character enough to want to see them to the end. But then, have you read The Magician by Colm Toibin?
I have, but I don't remember it very well.
Oh, okay. But because
that was a long time ago, wasn't it?
Oh no, that was like last year.
Oh, I haven't read it.
But in that, because we follow Thomas Mann through his life, and there's something.
Then I must read that.
Yeah, and there's something
Thomas Mann of The Death in Venice.
Yeah. And there's something so beautiful about it, because it kind of comes towards this end, where we obviously know he's going to die, because we know that the book is sort of charting his whole life. And we're basically watching this man who sort of shielded so much of his self and his sexuality through his life, and has this complicated relationship with his home country. And the final passages of that book were just stunning. I was just sat, like, I just sort of been reading it, and I was reading it, like, sat in a shopping center, and the shopping center was about to close. So I literally had to go out for, outside when I still had about 20 pages left, and I was just sat on like a little bit near some pavement, just sort of like reading the final 20 pages and just being like, I can't really cry in public, but like, my goodness.
It's happened to me on the bus. I've cried on the bus, on the tube.
Oh yeah.
It's funny you should mention that, though, because more than one person has compared The Pharmacist to A Death in Venice.
Oh, interesting.
And I haven't actually read it. I've seen the film, but I haven't actually read Death in Venice. So I feel like I should go back and visit that.
I can imagine that, actually, yeah, because sort of older older male figure, sort of younger, sort of object of beauty, kind of. Yeah. Huh.
I mean, having seen the film, I do. Yeah, I see the similarities, but I certainly didn't plan it. And then, so I mentioned Patrick White, and that, you know,
Yes.
I fell in love with the Vivisector. I tried to read this when I was very young.
Right.
It was given to me by a friend, and I found it really hard to get into. The tense that it's written in, I found that really tricky. And then I tried it again when I was a bit older, and just fell in love with it.
Yeah.
And so I started exploring lots of Patrick White's. I mean, if anyone doesn't know about Patrick White, he's an Australian, I think, kind of classic queer author, maybe very, very undersold, because I feel like this should be, everybody should know about this book. But
yeah, he won. I think he won the Nobel, didn't he? After a bit, but
it says on the cover, winner of the Nobel Prize,
which it feels just. I mean, I've not read anything else of his apart from the Vivisector.
So I've got here the Twyborne Affair, which
nice.
I would say has similarities to the book that you just mentioned.
Colm Toibin. Oh, Detransition Baby.
Detransition Baby. Yeah, I think there's similarities there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but I love this, and I keep going back to him as well.
Lovely. And are there any other book recommendations you have? Is there a little
I think I mean, you know, having the massive privilege of publishing queer royalty in Neil Bartlett, and I have to say it was a gift. I had no idea that we were going to be able to convince Neil to move from one of the really big publishers to come and work with us, and have him trust his work, you know, with two guys who were just kind of pretending to be publishers. But this is one of my favorite books, The Disappearance Boy, which is about a young lad who's got polio.
Right.
And so he's very small, and he's a magician's assistant. And while the magician is kind of doing all the sleight of hand on stage and distracting the audience, it's the disappearance boy, the boy with polio, who's making all the magic happen behind the scenes. And he's queer, and it all takes place in the 1940s, 1950s, I think, on the south coast.
Yeah.
You know, it's that time of you know, the end of the pier shows, and music halls, and and the magician has a very glamorous, you know, one of those glamorous female assistants who also does all the distraction on stage, but there's a lot of domestic violence going on, and the story is really about how the two characters, the female assistant and the boy with polio, help each other and become friends, and extract themselves from that awful relationship. Neil's just such a beautiful writer, and an amazing storyteller. So I would really recommend this to you and to all your readers out there.
Absolutely. I keep on meaning to read more of his since Address Book. I've got Skin Lane somewhere behind me there, but yeah, I'm so sort of keen, because I was so blown away by Address Book. I just thought that the sort of the sensitivity and warmth sort of in every interaction and behind every character was phenomenal. It really was. So yes, I need to check that one out. But thank you. Thank you for sort of adding to this sort of stack of books.
I got one more that
you do.
I really loved this, and I've got a feeling you might have read this.
No, I've got that. I bought that really recently. It's somewhere. It's literally just out of shot here.
Right. So, House of Impossible Beauties by Joseph Cassara, and it's all about, you know, it's inspired by that documentary Paris is Burning, about the ball scene in New York, I think Paris is Burning was mainly the Black community, and this book focuses on the Hispanic community.
Oh, okay, interesting.
But you know, it all blends together. But that was it's in the 1980s at the height of the AIDS crisis. And we all know how that ended. So get your tissues ready.
Yeah, because I think I was looking at the back of it, and I think because it references, I think Venus Extravaganza or something is in it, right? And I just was like, because I think that's the thing that threw me, because I was like, hang on, a real life person, is it? Like, she's in this, like as a real life person. So I think, yeah, I was really I'm really keen on that. I think I was going to say sort of a holiday read. I mean, it sounds like it's going to be quite a sad one, but I think in the sense of like a kind of, I might sort of take it. I'll see how I feel. I'll sort of.
There's so much humor in it and so much fun, and the characters are really beautiful, and you feel. I felt like they were my family. You know, I really got to know them, and I got really close to them. But yeah, I mean, read it on holiday, but it's not a light read for obvious reasons.
Right.
And everybody knows. I think everybody knows that territory really well. Lots of people have seen the documentary Paris is Burning, but then we've also seen
like Pose.
Yeah. You know, we've had Pose, and that was a long-running series, wasn't it? And a lot of people have watched it. So it suddenly brought the. Oh, and of course, then we have. I'm not a fan. I don't watch it, but RuPaul's Drag Race.
Right.
You know, that it's all kind of brought the ball scene to contemporary culture, hasn't it? So is territory well trodden there.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely keen to read that. And thank you for those recommendations. These are really, this is a really kind of fun mix actually of books, I think. So yeah, thank you. But thank you again so much for joining me and talking about your book and about these other books and about Incandescent as a whole. Yeah, are there any sort of last little messages you want to leave to anybody before we close off?
Only to thank everybody who supported us and bought our books, and yes, it's just a joy to be able to put that. It really is a joy being a publisher, making books that go out into the world. It's such a privilege to do that, and thank you, Bob, for having me.
My pleasure.
I feel like I popped around for a cup of tea.
It feels like that. I mean, a cup of tea where we have very different lighting. I'm starting to look a little bit like a ghost.
Starting to glow.
I don't know about glowing. I think I look a little bit like a very sort of confused moth. Like this sort of, where's the light? But no, thank you so much. Absolutely lovely to have you. Absolute pleasure. And as you mentioned as well, if you are in and around London, Incandescent run a number of sort of events, particularly in Above the Stag in Vauxhall. The next one I'm really
every month.
Yes. And I'm super excited about it, because I've rambled a lot about him on my channel, but Andrew Macmillan, who, like, possibly my favorite poet. I mean, I say this from 2 collections I've read. I'm about to read Pandemonium, but my goodness, that man can write. So yeah,
super privileged to have him on at the next Bold. Yeah. First Thursday of every month.
There we go.
Tickets are on sale now.
There we go. Well, super. Take care, and thank you again so much for coming to speak to us. And please do check out Justin's book and Incandescent more generally. And see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.